CAD presents FeatureScript sessions for Onshape.
Welcome to this CAD FeatureScript session for Onshape. We are going to create a custom feature for inserting parts into a part studio from a product catalog. So we have a product catalog. This just represents your products. And I have these configured. So if we open one of these up, like pipe, I have this part studio configured so that you can change the outer diameter or the inner diameter, change the length, and change a configuration list. This is just an example so that you can see, okay, this is what happens when you change it to configuration B or C. And this configuration list, when I set it up, I made sure to click these three little dots and edit the FeatureScript IDs so that the internal FeatureScript ID for the list is something I can expect to easily read. And same for the row IDs. The first one usually is called default, so I had to change that to A. So this is the general setup for these part studios. I'm using a custom feature called variable to string for converting the measurements or these configurations to a readable string format, because behind the scenes Onshape uses the metric system, to like 6 decimal places. That's Onshape's default precision. So this cleans that up and turns it into inches. I'm also using the set property feature, and this one allows you to configure values like the color or the part name. So I've got the part name of these parts set up to automatically name the part based on the configuration. So if we change these lengths, you'll see the part name is automatically updating to match whatever configurations you've used. Okay, so let's start creating the feature. We'll call this product catalog. Don't need the assembly. We'll call this the example studio. And create a new feature studio. We'll name it product catalog. Okay. So the first thing you do is click the new feature button, and I'm going to give this a name, product catalog. Rename the constant. And I will go ahead and fill out the user interface first so that we can get a feel for what the feature is going to look like. So if we look at our products, we've got categories of products, and then in those products you have subcategories like pipe A or pipe B. This could be an insulated pipe. These products could be anything. It could be bearings, wheels, cabinets. So we'll need a categories enum. We will export that so the user interface can see it. And the different types of parts we have are pipe, We'll go ahead and copy this for all the different types of categories. We have a coupler. And a cross. Okay, there's our category enum. And let's put that in the user interface. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So we've got a list here of all the different products, and I'll keep that there. So now let's put some icons beside each of these. That way it's a little easier. You don't have to read each one. You can memorize the icons. First, let's import these. You can get nice icons from svgrepo.com for free. That's where I found this list. Import. Here we go. So I got all these from SVG repo. We'll just select all of them with a shift click and import all of them at once. And we can use the tab manager to grab all of these and put them into a folder. I could have started in a folder, that would have been better. Okay, add selection to folder, icons. Oh, we missed one. There we go. Okay, so now we have all our icons there. Let's import them into the Feature Studio. So we'll need to give each one of these a name. When naming things like icons or imports, you don't have to declare whether it's a variable or constant. You can just type the name right out. We'll do icon for the features icon, pipe, coupler. Now we can use the import button. Go to files, and we've got a list of all of our SVGs right here. So the first one will be the icon for the feature. So that one I called catalog right there. Now let's click the new spot we want the next one to be imported. So we'll do pipe, coupler, cross. Okay, now that all these icons are imported, let's clean that up a little bit. Inside the annotation for the enum, we can put icon, and we'll type pipe and then 2 colons and then blob data, just like that. Let's see how that looks. Awesome, much easier to read. Now let's add the icon for the feature. And we'll clean up this annotation for the main feature a bit. Put each one on a different row. icon. There. Reformat the studio. There we go. It's looking nice. Okay, next let's add the subcategories. We'll need an enum for each of these. If we look at the catalog that I have, I only have multiple different subcategories for pipe A, or for the pipe category. So I got pipe A and pipe B. You could do this for all of them, but for this example, I'll just have multiple ones for pipe A, and all the rest I'll just have only one option. But we'll create the enums anyways. So we'll need an enum for each of these. Export enum, and this will be pipe enum. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this. We won't need an icon for this because all elbows will look roughly the same. And, or, you know, elbows or cross sections or pipes. In the pipe enum, we'll do pipe A. And we will have pipe B. Actually, let's change it to option A. This way I don't have to retype this for every enum that I do for all these other ones. Option A. There we go. And go ahead and copy that for the next one. And then since pipes are the only ones with multiple options right now, we'll make option B. Okay, and let's go ahead and make all the other enums. So coupler. I like to put enum at the end of the name, that way I know for sure exactly what I'm dealing with. It's not required, but yeah. So now we only have to rename the enum for each of these, since option is very generic. Here are all of our sub-enums, or enums for the subcategory. So here we'll want to check to see which category was selected, and we will show only the enum for the subcategory that was selected. So if the category that was selected is equal to the category enum, we'll start with pipe, then we will show a new enum for the pipe. So enum parameter, then I don't want to have to, well, do this each time, so we'll just call this subcategory enum. And then now I'll only have to rename the definition for each one. So this would be pipe. We'll just call it pipe. There we go. And it'll use the pipe enum. Now it'll be easier to copy and paste that 7 times or however many it is. So we'll want this to be an else if statement. And the next one in the list is a coupler. Change it to the coupler enum. It doesn't autocomplete if there are errors in the Feature Studio. So because both of these definitions are pipe, I'll have to rename one of them. Coupler. Or maybe I just forgot to make this one. That's the problem. There it is. And that gets rid of our error. Okay, cool. Now we'll copy this like 6 more times or so. There are all of our subcategory enums. Commit and see how that looks. So option A and option B. Pipe has 2 options. This could be, however many we put, and all of the other ones should only have 1 option. Yep, option A. Great. Now, if you wanted to, you could make the primary category, you could make it a horizontal enum. This way, you wouldn't have to click it once and then click it twice. You could just click the icon. So let's do that. That might look kind of cool. Since we only have a few pipe categories, this would be fine for a company like this. Underneath the category enum, under the annotation for it, we'll do UI hint. Horizontal enum. Now we don't want to show all of these names, so we could hide the name. So we'll make it horizontal and we'll put it in an array so that it can input multiple UI hints. We'll do, I think it's display short. No? Oh, okay. You can't do that from the UI hint. What we can do is just rename these to use like the bar symbol or something, the pipe symbol. There we go, that's looking nice. Now I got these little buttons up here and they're colored, that's cool. So again, if you had a lot of product categories, then this wouldn't work. You would need the drop-down list, but since we only have this many and they're all nice, very distinguishable icons, then we can keep it like this. Okay, let's move on. Next, we will want to have another little option for where to put this pipe or this product in the features or in the Part Studio. So beneath all of those if statements, let's do a query parameter. We'll call it locations. In this example, we'll want to be able to select a face and put the part on the center of that face. And we'll also want to be able to choose a make connector. And we don't want a max number of picks restricted because we want to be able to insert multiple instances of the part. So we'll do entity type.face or body type make connector. Now we'll be able to make an implicit make connector, choose a make connector, or select a face. And then something that might also be nice is a replicate feature. So if they select a face, you could have it replicate to all other identical faces. Let's do Boolean parameter. Call it replicate to matching faces. Okay, now let's check this out. Nice, we've got our locations, we have a mate connector button. We could make an implicit mate. We could edit that and tweak its position a bit. And it's looking good. The next thing we'll want to add to the user interface is configurations for those parts. Because each part might have different types of configurations, we'll also need to make an enum for the different possible types of configurations. They could be a Boolean, they could be a list, it could be a length, angle, integer, real, or text. Let's make an enum for those. And let's store it just at the bottom of these other ones. And we'll call it configuration type. And here's where we're going to list them off. We don't need the annotation for these since this isn't going to be visible to the user, I think. That should do it. These are all the different configuration types that a Part Studio configuration can have. And if it were to be equal to a list, we would have to have another enum for that list. But for now, let's just make a generic one just for the sake of this example. So we'll call it a generic list. And inside it, we can just put A, B, C. Okay, next let's make an array within the user interface. And there are two types of arrays. There's a normal array where you have a button that adds different items to the list, or there's a selection-driven array. So we will use a selection-driven array, but we'll hide the interface that's making the selections and allow only the editing logic in this feature to make those selections. The user will never be able to add more items to this list. It'll be handled by the code. Array parameter, and we'll make it selection-driven. And let's call this configurations. And configuration. Driving query entities. Yep, that's fine. To rename all this stuff. And configuration. There. Okay. Now this is the driving parameter, so we don't want the user to be able to see this. So let's add a UI hint to it. Always hidden. No, they can never touch it. Next, we don't want each item in the array to just be called configuration. So let's use it's called a item label template. So we'll add this to the annotation. Oh, it's already there. There we go. Okay. So we'll want a different one for this. We'll use a string. And we'll call it name. And this will always have this hidden. We can control this by code as well. And let's change that from entities to name. That way this is naming the element and the array. Okay, and we'll need to know what kind of configuration this item in the array represents. So we made our configuration enum configuration type. So we'll put an enum here called type. We'll call it config type. Oops. There it is. And I think we should have this always hidden as well. Now let's get on to some stuff that we can actually see in the user interface. So we'll use editing logic to update these. Next, we'll need to check for what this configuration type is. And based on what we've set it using the edit logic, we can show the configuration input for the user. Let's go through the list. So if it equals a Boolean, then we will want a Boolean parameter. Let's copy that. And next thing in the list is a list. So here we will have a enum parameter. And actually, we won't want to see the names of these because the name of the configuration we are controlling with this. So these we can just use like a dot, a decimal or something so that it looks very tiny and out of the way. So we'll use the generic list here that we made. Let's continue. We have all of the different configuration types now that are possible for this array. So if we test it out, it's not going to show anything because this is going to be an empty array at the moment. But let's go ahead and just open it up. So this is where those configurations are going to be. And we will dynamically add them using editing logic based on the default configurations we set for each of these different product categories, because we will assume that the elbow pieces will always have the same inputs, which would be radius, pipe diameters, and then the reducer would have an ID and an OD for the input, and also an ID and an OD on the output of that reducer. The pipe is just going to have an ID and an OD and a length. Not all of these will have lengths, so we'll need to go in and predefine them. So next, let's make a map that is going to store those predefined configurations for the different product types. If we were using API and with like a custom app, then we might be able to do that dynamically. but because we're only in FeatureScript right now, we don't have the ability to get those configurations. Let's create a map that stores those configurations and maybe store the products in that map as well. So depending on what selections the user picks for the category and subcategory, we can use that map to get everything. Before we make that map, let's go import the part studios for each of these different products. And let's rename these to icon because I want these to be for the actual parts. So we'll copy that. And then we'll delete all of the imports for those. Copy that again. And now we'll rename these. Okay, now we can paste that list back in here. And there's going to be two pipes, so let's add pipe A and pipe B. So if you had a bunch of different products, you'd need each one of these named according to those products. We only have one of each of these other types, so that's fine for now. So now click the import button, go to other documents, and I recently opened these example products. Let's get the pipe A, pipe A, pipe B. Now we want the coupler, the cross, now let's make the configuration map that's going to store all the information for each of those parts, and it will automatically pick it based on what the user has selected. And we'll call this catalog. I'm going to set it equal to a map. Categories enum. So we'll just go through all of these and put them in this catalog. We'll start with the first one, pipe. We'll set this equal to another map where we can store some more data inside of it. Okay, inside this map, we'll want to store the part that we imported so that we can access that. You know, if we've got multiple different types of parts, we'll need to select that part from a subcategory, which we created all these different subcategory enums. The pipe actually has two options. So in this, we will put the part, and then here we will have another map where we have the pipe subcategory. So then we've got pipe enum option A. What did we call it up here? Pipe A, we'll copy that, and we'll copy pipe B as well. So we got pipe A, 2 colons, followed by build. This is going to be basically this is how we're going to derive that part, instantiate it into the part studio. And we need to add pipe enum option B, and we'll build that. Put it on the next row so it's easier to read. And so we've got the part map right here, and then the user will select that subcategory and it will then build that part. So next we need the configurations that those parts can have. And let's make that also a map. Configurations. For the pipe, let's go get those configurations. So we've got OD, ID, length, and then a list. And just to double check, let's open up the configuration panel and check the FeatureScript IDs. Okay, this one shows it here, I believe. Yeah, but then the list doesn't show it there. You have to actually go into this FeatureScript IDs and check it out here. So we've got OD, ID, length, and then generic list. And that list does have the same options as our generic list here, which is why it will work. And they are capitalized. Here we can have data for this configuration. So we need to know what type of configuration this is. It might be useful to store a default value. So we'll have another map in here. Configuration type. And here we will store the configuration type. This is going to be a length. And the next item in here, we'll say it's the default value we want this to have. I don't know if I'll actually use that, but just in case we want to expand this in the future, we can go ahead and have it. We need one more. We need the list. And the ID, yeah. So let's put this on different rows so it's easier to see. So we've got the OD. We'll do one for the ID and one for the length and then one for the list. ID. And we got to put commas after each of those. And all of these are links except for the generic list, which we'll change that to the list type that we created. And the default value we'll say is generic list A. And the default value for the OD should be a little larger than the ID. So something like that. Now we'll need to do this for each of the different categories so that we don't have to hard code these keys in here. Let's make some more enums that will store these keys. We'll call it config data. And we'll want the configuration type and the default value. And instead of having these hard-coded in here, that'll be kind of hard to find, we can do config data, config type, and then over here, config data.default value. We'll copy and paste these for each of these. Okay, much better. Now let's do the same thing for each of the other categories. Let's put a comma there, then copy it. Just do one at a time, that way we don't lose track of what we've done. So next up is the coupler. So this only has one option. So we'll get rid of that option 2. And this uses the coupler enum. And since we use the same name for each of the enums, we don't have to retype that. Coupler, since there's only one coupler. We can do Control F just to verify that it is spelled the same. And the configurations for the coupler, let's go check that out. Okay, the coupler has the OD, ID, length, and generic list. OD, ID, length, and generic list. Okay, that's great. Cool. Looks like we're red right here. Let's just get rid of this for a moment. Okay, so this is fine. So we should just be able to copy this. Still fine. So it must have been something in here that I messed up. Probably one of these. Yeah, that's what it is. I deleted too many of these. Okay, all these we can leave the same for the coupler, except let's make the default length like 4 inches. And for the pipe, let's make the default length 10 inches or something. Okay, we're rolling. Let's move on. Let's add the editing logic that will dynamically create the configurations that we've prepared for here with the array and with the catalog map. So let's head over to Onshape's standard library source, since I can never remember all the inputs for the editing logic and there seems to not be a snippet for it. So we'll go to FeatureScript documentation, standard library source, and I know the whole feature uses editing logic, so we'll search for whole. And now let's search for the edit logic. We'll copy their header as well. Theirs is called whole edit logic, and we'll copy that. Don't need those anymore. So ours is going to be called just my edit logic. So we're going to call it my edit logic. And don't forget to return the definition. Okay, let's go back to the top. And add the edit logic to this. And let's use what we called ours, which was my edit logic. Make sure we spelled it correctly. Yep. And inside this, what we can do is check to see which product the user selected and dynamically add elements to the array that represent those preset configurations that we stored in the catalog map. So we don't want this to be updating all the time. Let's check to see if the user has selected a different product category, because we're going to have the same configurations for one product category throughout that product's category. So we're going to check if the old definition no category. Okay, so this means that this code in here is only going to run if the user selected a new category of part, and then it will have it update the configurations based on that category of part. So first, we don't want it infinitely adding more categories every time it selects a new one, so let's clear the array. This way, it doesn't add more and more configurations. It just gets rid of the old ones and then adds whatever these new ones will be. Then let's make a constant called configs. And here, we're going to get the configurations from the catalog map. And the first thing we're going to select from it is the category. So the user is going to select the category, and then they're going to select a subcategory. We'll only need the configurations for this category. The subcategories aren't going to have different configurations. We didn't create an enum for that, so let's do that. Subcategory data. And we'll have configurations and part. Okay, now instead of using part, we're going to use the subcategory keys here. That way we don't hard code anything. Actually, let's use the find and replace. Well, surely it can find more of these because I have it here, here. Oh, is the search not working because there's an error? Fine. Okay, we'll comment this out. That way there's no FeatureScript error. That way the search can work. Now let's search again. There we go. Now it's finding it. So we're going to replace that with subcategory data dot part. Oops, all caps. And it's showing 8 of them. We don't want to accidentally replace something that we don't want, so let's just go through each of them. Yep, that was correct. Okay. Now let's do the same thing for configurations. See, that's why I clicked through the replace instead of doing all, because turns out we have that also used down here in the annotations or in the precondition. Now that we have those not hard-coded, let's go back to the editing logic function and uncomment that. Now we can use subcategory data dot, here we go. And now we don't have to try to figure out what we called it because it's part of that enum. Okay, so this should be all of the configurations for that part type. Now let's loop through these in a for loop. And we'll do the for in loop. That way we don't have to count it. Config in configs. And what we're going to do here is loop through all of the preset configurations and dynamically add those to the array in the user interface. So let's create a variable, call it this config. So we're going to need the name, and we're also going to need the type. Because if we look up here in this array, we've got this name, and we've got the configuration type. And based on the type, the UI will automatically show or hide the inputs for the user to type out. And then the name is going to be retrieved from the catalog map that we have. And then entities is just going to be empty and hidden. That's just a workaround so that there's no add configuration button. This will be handled by code. This config.name is going to equal the config that's in this loop key. So we're going to get the name of the configuration that we're looping through, and that name is stored right here. Next, let's get the configuration type. Let's make sure that's how we spelled it. So instead of getting the key, let's get the value of it. And we want the configuration type. Here's an example. There's the key, and here is the value. And this is a map using the config. So we'll use the config data to retrieve a value from this value. We're getting the variable type because we aren't going to use the default value for now. Okay, and we return the definition. Let's go try that out. product catalog. We'll select a, now it's only going to run the edit logic code whenever we make a change to the UI. Did we commit it? Yep, it's committed. And nothing is happening. Let's see what's going on. The loop requires a map or an array. Okay, let's go up and look at this map. Based on how this is organizing these, I think I put them in the wrong map. So we've got this. There it is. Okay. So subcategory data should be within the pipe map right here, and the coupler map and all of those. So let's fix that. Let's copy this, or cut that, and we'll put it right there. Oops, I think I put it in the wrong spot. It needs to be, have a comma. There we go. That's better. Okay. I thought it looked a little funny earlier with how that was structured. Now let's just do that for each of these. Let's try that. There it is. Now we have our list of configurations for the pipe. And if we switch to coupler, it should update this list. Yes, it is. And the reducer should have lots more options. Yep. Awesome. One problem I can see is that there's the option to delete these. So let's fix that. So if the size of that one does not equal the size of the new one, then we're going to set it equal to the old one. Basically, if the user made a change and we don't like that change, we're going to undo it and tell it to be equal to the old definition. So now if we try to erase one of these, it puts it back. Okay, now let's move on to instantiating these parts into the Part Studio. I'll do that right here. So first, let's create a new variable for the instantiator. And we want a new instantiator, but we want one that has options. And let's change the ID just a bit so that it's more specific for this thing we're creating. And we'll need a configuration map. Basically, we want to know which enum to use, or which subcategory the user has selected. And here we can use a switch statement. So here we can loop through all of the different configurations and generate those configs. We'll do a for in loop, call this config, and configure. We'll do the definition configurations. There we go. So now we're going to loop through every single configuration that was created by the edit logic. And now we're going to take this configuration for this loop and set it equal to a map. So basically, we want to know what the input the user has used for this configuration. But since we have so many different ones, we need to use a switch statement and go through and find the correct one. This config, and we'll use config.name. And we'll set it equal to a switch statement. And we'll use config type. So we're going to go through each of these configuration types that are possible and set this value based on those different types. So if the configuration type is a Boolean, then we want this value to be equal to config.bool. Oops, there. Okay, so we're looping through each of the different configurations in the array, and the config for this loop is this. If the config type is equal to Boolean, right here, then we want to use this input. If it's equal to list, then we want to use this input. And so what we're doing here is switching through each of these config types and setting this value in the config map that we just created equal to bool. Or let's go through the other types. So if it is the list, then we'll want config.list. If it is length, then we'll want config.length. There we go. So now this config map should have the corresponding input for each configuration. Next, let's merge the maps. There we go. So we're adding this map that we just filled out with this to this set of maps up here, which will be all of the configurations. And next, let's figure out which subcategory the user selected. So outside of this for loop, we'll create a constant called subcategory. selection. And we'll also use a switch statement for this. And the driving parameter will be category. So we'll loop through each category, and based on what was selected, we will update the subcategory selection here. So we'll use the category enum. And this is why we used all of these different enums, so that we don't have to go and hard code these values. Categories enum. We'll start out with pipe. So this is the subcategory selection if it is equal to pipe. And we'll need to go through each of these different types. Now we should have the subcategory selection. Next, let's get the part that was selected. Now we can use a constant. So we'll use the catalog. And then inside that, we'll use definition category. Then within the category, we'll use the subcategory data. And we've got two different categories here, or data. We'll use the part, because we use the configuration down here in the edit logic. So we've got the part. Now within that, we will use the subcategory selection that we just picked. So we get category, then the part, and then that selection that the user made from that enum. Okay, next, let's see what the UI has. Okay, so the next thing is the locations. So we need to figure out whether it's using a make connector or a face, and then whether or not to replicate two matching faces. If we told it to replicate to matching faces, then we'll want to update those locations. So definition.locations equals q matching. And we'll probably want to add to it, not just completely replace it, in case they're using make connectors or faces. So Q union. Now we're adding to it instead of just replacing it. Next, we'll create a variable called vectors and another variable called EV locations. Here we can evaluate all those different locations and store them in an array. And now we can loop through each of those locations and handle them. We'll do a for in loop, location, and locate EV locations. So we're going to instantiate with a transform that goes from the XY plane to either a plane on the face that we selected or the mate connector. Because all of our parts have been modeled on the top plane and origin. That is basically exactly where we want them all to start from. Now we could get fancy and go from a specific mate connector, but for this example, let's just go from the XY plane since our parts have been prepared that way. Inside the loop, we'll create a variable called toPlane, and this will be the plane that we are instantiating to. So if it's a mate connector, let's check that first. So if not is query empty, then inside that, we'll check the body type. And body type dot mate connector. Query to filter, we'll do location. If it's a mate connector, then the toPlane equals EV mate connector location. And then we'll want to take this coordinate system and turn it into a plane. Just like that. And if it is not a mate connector, then we will assume it is a face because those are the only two options we're allowing for selections. EV face tangent plane. Location, since this is a face now, and we want it to be just in the center of that face, like that. So let's test that out. Actually, these are invisible planes, so we need to continue. We can add the instance. So we've got a few different options here. We use build since these are not a derived part studio, they were imported. And the build is going to be the part that we just grabbed earlier from the catalog. And for the options, let's use configuration. And then we'll get the configs that we got earlier. And for the transform, we'll need to add that. Okay, so we've got this instance added for each location in the loop. Now let's go outside of the loop and instantiate it. Instantiate the instantiator. Okay, let's give that a shot. Let's create like a test part that we can put this on. Now let's try out the part catalog. We'll just use a pipe for now. I don't see any errors. Let's try the replicate button. Awesome. And let's change the part length. Oops, that's the OD. Length. Go. So we don't want this just to be catalog 1, catalog 2. Let's make this a little more descriptive. So we can go up to the top of the feature and add another option to it called feature name template. And we'll make a computed parameter called feature name. And let's copy that. Now at the bottom of this body, do set feature computed parameter. And the name of it is what we just typed out, feature name. And then for the value, let's just use the subcategory selection, because this is going to be the name of that part that we chose, I think. Subcategory selection, and it's should already be a string, I think. So let's try it again. And option A, that is the name of that part selection. So let's put coupler on this thing like that. And then we'll tell it to find all matching faces. And we'll do each of these. Cool. Now if we make all of these, so let's get rid of a few of these options, make all of these the same diameter. So now it automatically inserts them if we just click one face. Now we can, it would be nice if this didn't say option, just option A, if it said what category it was as well. So let's add that to this. To definition.category. There we go. Now we know it's inserting a pipe, option A, and coupler, option A. Then it tells us everywhere it created make connectors. That's all for this session. Don't forget to check out our step-by-step FeatureScript video tutorials on our website. Bye for now, and happy onshaping.